It's good to be here. It's good to see a lot of young people who are at least interested enough to be here tonight. I'm hoping that when we've finished, it'll have really confirmed your interest in being part of Crossing Borders and being an active part of Crossing Borders, because you will undoubtedly have a lot of energy and a lot of ideas which are going to be which would be great to tap into, and you can also then have influence across the university through all the networks that you build during your time, whilst you're here. I work for Refugee Action. I've been working for Refugee Action for 10 years now, and we're an independent charity. We are largely funded by the Home Office, but like Refugee Council and various other charities, we are independent. We work with asylum seekers and refugees. We've been going for nearly 30 years, and most of our work is with asylum seekers and is working to help asylum seekers to get the support that they're entitled to get while the Home Office considers their claims for asylum. When I talk about asylum seekers, I always like to double check that people are quite sure what I'm talking about. Is there anybody who'd have a stab at defining what an asylum seeker is, and perhaps what a refugee is, and if there is a difference? Anybody want to have a stab at defining what's an asylum seeker?
A person seeking asylum in the UK.
Right. Is a refugee the same thing?
No.
Okay. Any ideas?
Because asylum, that's a legal process, whereas refugee is someone who's run away from something for good reason.
Yes and no. We think of refugees as people who flee, and that's perfectly correct, and that's what you're talking about. Legally, in Britain, a refugee is somebody who's come to Britain, asked for protection or asylum, and been granted it. Been recognised as somebody who is being persecuted and who needs protection because of the persecution they suffered, or because if they go home they're likely to suffer persecution again. And there's a whole series of grounds which are to do with your nationality, your politics, your social group, your gender, your sexuality. All those sorts of things can be reasons why you're persecuted, and might be reasons why you're allowed to stay and why you're given protection. So technically, an asylum seeker asks for protection, and a refugee is somebody who's been given it, who's been allowed to stay. Although mostly we talk about refugees, and we refer to all those people who have fled for one reason or another from their country of origin. And that's just a very brief definition. But I mean, if you use the term refugees generally, it's not wrong. But it's just that in the debate, particularly in the media, asylum seeker is a term that is used in all sorts of ways, and usually unhelpfully. So it's worth knowing the distinction. One of the questions that Taj and Sana were asking, or asked me to look at, was where do people go? Why do they end up where they end up? And do they do so as a result of choice? And I mean, the reality is, worldwide, the vast majority of people go over the nearest border. And many of them go into camps, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, well, millions of people actually, as you'll see in a minute. If people can travel and choose a destination, why would they choose Britain? Various studies have been done over many years which suggest that it's not to do with our benefit system, or that we're a soft touch, or that we'll be allowed to work, or any of those things to do with the support that people might get, or the things that they may be able to claim. It's because the biggest one is English is the largest second language in the world, because of colonialism, because obviously America now, because it's used in international trade. So there are millions and millions of people across the world who speak some English. Now, if you had to flee your home and find a country to go to, it's likely you would choose a country to go to where you spoke the language, if you had a choice. And so people who come to Britain, having chosen to come to Britain, many, many, many of them have come because they can speak a little bit of English and they think that will help them to get by, and it does. places where they know someone. The colonial connection means that lots and lots of people in Britain have connection with big parts of Asia and big parts of Africa. And so people who have a choice often come to Britain because they have a connection here. But also, they still have the notion, which is not entirely a wrong notion, but I have to say it's been damaged quite seriously in the last 13 years by, sadly enough, a Labour government. They still have the notion that Britain's a country of democracy, fair play, and where human rights are respected. I have to say I think that's been in some danger. It's rocking a bit. But people still believe that of Britain. And so again, if they've got a choice about where they come to, they might choose Britain for that reason as well. Everything that has been, all the studies that have been done suggest that as few as a third of people who claim asylum in Britain have actually chosen to come to Britain. The vast majority of people who arrive in Britain pay an agent, trust them literally with their lives, just say, take me somewhere safe in Europe, and end up where they end up. And some of them pay to go to certain countries, including a colleague of mine, and end up somewhere else entirely. So when people say, oh, they all choose to come here, why do they all choose to come here? They don't all choose to come here. It's only a tiny fraction of the refugees in the world who come to Britain at all, and most of them don't choose Britain. They happen to end up in Britain. And it's worth thinking when people say, oh, we get too many, we get far too many. Who hosts the most refugees in the world? Well, funnily enough, not a Western wealthy country, but Pakistan. Why does Pakistan host more refugees than anywhere else in the world? Well, because we've got Afghanistan and Iran next to it, both of which have produced loads and loads and loads of refugees over the last 15 years. Iran and Syria also hold loads and loads of refugees because between them is Iraq. And when we get anxious about the number of people in Britain, we need to bear in mind that we're not talking figures like this, we're not talking anything remotely like this. And Pakistan, whilst it has some wealth, is nothing like the wealthy country that Britain is. In terms of Britain, where are people coming from? In 2009, the largest group was Zimbabweans. Not altogether a surprise. Afghanistan, not altogether a surprise. Iran, not a surprise. Eritrea, there's quite a nasty conflict ongoing over the border in Eritrea. Pakistan, people might be more surprised at, but there are all sorts of tensions in different parts of Pakistan which cause people to leave. And there are some issues about things like honour killing, which cause people to come and seek asylum. China has a terrible human rights record. Sri Lanka has seen a lot of conflict over the last 20 years, and that's not really died out yet. Somalia is a complete mess in terms of a functioning state. Iraq, whilst it may be better than it has been, a lot of people aren't convinced that the Western intervention has cleared things up in the way that politicians claim. Nigeria, people come for all sorts of reasons from Nigeria. Generally speaking, the Home Office is very unsympathetic towards Nigerians who claim asylum. They don't think they've got any good reason to be here, and they sort of assume that at the outset. But those are the 10 biggest groups, and then there's people from probably 50 other countries who come and claim asylum. How many people claim asylum? Oh, have I jumped? No, I haven't. Yes, well, in Leicester, we've got about 550 people who are still in the asylum system, who are being supported by the Home Office. But we think we've got as many as 300 people who aren't being supported by the Home Office at all, who are destitute, who are flitting from friend to friend, sometimes staying on the streets. And these are the people generally that we're dealing with in Refugee Action. Nationally, in the UK, 24,500 claims last year. We're a nation of 60 million people. It's not a lot. And when you think there's probably about 21 million refugees in the world who are of concern to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, 24,500, not very much really. And just in terms of how many of those are allowed to stay, currently more than 70% are rejected. But of those 70%, the people who made appeals against their rejection, nearly a third succeeded, which suggested the first decision was wrong. And that's something that refugee organisations are really very concerned about, that the quality of decision making is still very poor, and that lots and lots of people are refused asylum without actually having their cases properly and fairly heard. And as a very, very final footnote, I mean, having worked with refugees for 10 years, I would say that I'm absolutely convinced that the vast, vast, vast majority of people who claim asylum honestly believe they need protection, even if when you examine their cases they probably don't. But people don't come here for a laugh or for no reason at all. They come here because they think they need protection. And in the end, when they're tested and examined, it may be that they don't, or that they're assessed not to need protection. But I think it's really important to remember that people come here honestly believing that they are in danger, because the newspapers would tell you that most people come here just as a scam to try and make money out of being in Britain. I think that's a terrible, terrible lie, and does a huge disservice to a lot of decent people who are simply trying to find protection and preserve themselves and preserve their lives.